Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kang Min-Seok's penthouse, each drop catching the city lights below and scattering them like broken glass. He stood alone in the dark, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, staring at a folded sheet of paper on the table in front of him. Divorce papers. He still hadn't thrown them away. 8 months. 8 months since Amara had walked out of his life without looking back, without a single word of goodbye that meant anything. His phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Every bodyguard in the room froze. Only 3 people on Earth had this number. Do-won, his second-in-command. Jae-hyun, his younger brother. And the woman who used to be his wife. He answered before the second ring finished. Mr. Kang. A man's voice. Calm. Clinical. A doctor's voice. This is Seoul General. Your ex-wife is currently undergoing emergency surgery. Min-Seok's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed flat. What happened to her? She's stable for now. But there's something else you need to know. A pause that felt like it lasted a year. She listed you as her next of kin. And her 8-month-old daughter is here. Alone. Min-Seok didn't move. Mr. Kang, the child's birth certificate names you as the father. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the marble floor. If this story already has your heart racing, hit subscribe now, because the next 10 minutes will change everything you think you know about this family. Like the video if you want to see how far a father will go for a daughter he never knew existed, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and fear. Min-Seok moved through it like a man walking into a war zone, 3 bodyguards trailing behind him, none of them daring to speak. A nurse led him to a small recovery room near the NICU. And there she was. A baby girl, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, dark curls already framing a small round face, eyes wide open and staring straight up at the ceiling lights like she was trying to memorize the world. Min-Seok stopped at the doorway. He had stared down armed men without blinking. He had walked into rooms where he knew there were guns pointed at his chest. Nothing in his life had ever made his hands shake the way they shook now. Go ahead, the nurse said gently. She's been fussy all night. Maybe she just needs her father. Min-Seok stepped forward slowly, like the floor might give out beneath him. He reached down. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped instantly around his index finger, gripping with a strength that didn't match her size at all. Something cracked open in his chest. You already knew about her, right? The nurse asked, smiling. Your wife talked about you so much during her appointments. Min-Seok's eyes didn't leave the baby's face. No, he said quietly. I didn't know she existed. The nurse's smile faltered. Oh. I'm so sorry, I assumed. What's her name? Zara. He said it once, testing the word in his mouth like it belonged to a different language than the one he'd spoken his entire life. Zara. The baby gurgled, still gripping his finger, and for one impossible second, Kang Min-Seok forgot he was a man feared across 3 countries. He was just a father, meeting his daughter for the first time, 8 months too late. Amara survived the surgery, but she didn't wake up. Min-Seok stood outside the ICU window for almost an hour, watching the machines breathe for the woman he had once called his wife. Her face was pale, bandaged along one side, tubes running from her arm. He didn't go inside. He couldn't. Instead, he turned to the attending physician and demanded answers the way he demanded everything, like the world owed him an explanation and would suffer if it refused. What happened to her? Who did this? She was brought in after a car accident, the doctor said. Single vehicle. The investigating officers haven't ruled anything out yet. Has she ever come here before? During the pregnancy? The doctor checked the chart. Yes. Regularly. Always alone. Always paid in cash. Family contact. None listed. No emergency contact at all, actually, until tonight, when she added you. Min-Seok's eyes narrowed. A woman who had once filled his contacts list, his calendar, his entire life, now reduced to cash payments and an empty space where family should be. She had hidden herself completely. And she had hidden his daughter just as completely. Why? Bringing a newborn into a household built for war was not something Min-Seok had ever prepared for, and it showed within the first hour. His penthouse, usually silent except for the hum of security monitors, became a battlefield of panic. "Boss, she won't stop crying," one bodyguard said, holding Zara at arm's length like she was a live grenade. "Did you check the diaper?" "I don't know how to check a diaper." Across the room, Do-won, Min-Seok's oldest friend and most trusted lieutenant, was hunched over his phone, scrolling frantically. "It says here you check for a yellow line," Do-won announced. "If it turns dark, that means..." "There's no yellow line on this one, it's just covered in." "Don't finish that sentence." Min-Seok finally crossed the room, lifted Zara from the bodyguard's stiff arms, and within seconds, her crying slowed to soft hiccups. The room fell into stunned silence. "How did you do that?" Do-won asked. "I don't know," Min-Seok admitted, looking down at his daughter with something close to disbelief. "She just stopped." That night, 3 of his most hardened men who had taken bullets without flinching, sat in a circle on the nursery floor, humming a Korean lullaby none of them remembered learning, because nothing else would calm her down. Min-Seok stood in the doorway, watching grown men who controlled half the underground economy of Seoul gently rocking a baby girl to sleep, and for the first time in years, his home didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like something else entirely. It felt like family. The feeling didn't last. 3 nights later, while Zara slept against his chest in the nursery, Min-Seok found himself scrolling through Amara's old phone, searching for anything that might explain the silence, the disappearance, the daughter she never told him about. What he found instead broke him in a different way. Hundreds of photos. Amara, smiling, hand resting on a growing belly. Ultrasound images, carefully dated, week by week. Videos, dozens of them, recorded in soft lighting, her voice gentle and full of warmth. He pressed play on one. "Hi, baby," she whispered to the camera, rubbing her stomach. "Daddy doesn't know about you yet, but he's going to love you so much. I just need to find the right time to tell him." Min-Seok's throat tightened. He clicked the next video. And the next. Each one more tender than the last, each one addressed to a child she clearly already loved beyond reason. Then, abruptly, the videos stopped. 6 months ago. No explanation. No final message. Just silence, exactly when she would have been far enough along to tell him everything. Something had happened 6 months ago. Something that made her stop talking to their unborn daughter, stop trusting the man she once promised to spend her life with, and disappear into a world of cash payments and empty emergency contact forms. Min-Seok stared at the frozen image on the screen, Amara mid-laugh, one hand on her belly, and a memory he had buried for months finally clawed its way back to the surface. 10 months ago, before any of this, before the divorce, before the silence. Min-Seok had been reviewing security footage from one of his warehouses when a flagged file caught his attention. A black SUV, unregistered, parked outside a private restaurant downtown. Cameras inside, the kind his organization quietly maintained in half the city's high-end establishments, had picked up something he never expected to see. Amara.
Sitting across from a man Min-Seok had spent the last 6 years trying to destroy. Chairman Choi. The leader of the only syndicate powerful enough to actually threaten his organization's survival. A man responsible, Min-Seok believed, for the deaths of 2 of his men the year before. He watched the footage frame by frame, his blood running colder with every second. Amara reached into her bag. She handed Choi a sealed folder. Choi opened it just enough to glance inside, then nodded once and slid it into his jacket. Min-Seok had watched the entire exchange 3 times before confronting her that same night. "Explain this to me," he had said, throwing his tablet onto the table between them, the frozen image of her and Choi glowing accusingly. Amara's face had gone pale. "Min-Seok. You met with him. You gave him something. After everything I've told you about that man. I can't explain it right now. Can't, or won't. Please," she had said, her voice breaking in a way that should have stopped him, should have made him listen instead of assume. "Please just trust me." But trust, for Kang Min-Seok, had always come with conditions. And in that moment, watching the woman he loved refuse to explain herself, those conditions had run out completely. "I can't be married to someone who works with my enemies behind my back," he had told her. "I want a divorce." She hadn't fought him. She had simply signed the papers the very next morning, packed 2 suitcases, and left without a single word of protest. And that silence, her refusal to fight for them, had hurt him more than the footage ever had. Present day, holding his sleeping daughter in his arms, Min-Seok finally understood that her silence might not have been guilt. It might have been protection. Do-won found him in the nursery just after midnight, still holding Zara, still staring at nothing. "You should sleep," Do-won said quietly. "I keep thinking about the night I confronted her." "About Choi?" Do-won hesitated, then sat down across from him. "I never believed she betrayed you." "Not really." Min-Seok looked up sharply. "You knew about the meeting?" "I knew there was a meeting. I didn't know why. But I've known Amara for years, Min-Seok. That woman loved you in a way most of us never get to experience once in our lives. She wasn't capable of selling you out. Whatever she was doing with Choi, I'd bet everything I own it wasn't betrayal." "Then what was it?" Do-won didn't have an answer. Neither did Min-Seok. But for the first time since the divorce, doubt had finally cracked through 8 months of certainty. The weeks that followed transformed Min-Seok in ways no one in his organization expected. Midnight feedings became routine. He learned the exact temperature Zara preferred her bottle, the specific blanket she refused to sleep without, the particular rhythm of pacing that calmed her fastest. She learned to recognize him too. The first time she laughed, a full, unrestrained giggle in response to him accidentally dropping a stuffed rabbit on his own foot, Min-Seok found himself laughing along with her, genuinely, for the first time in longer than he could remember. The first time she reached for him instead of anyone else in the room, refusing to be held by his most trusted guards, insisting on him and only him, something inside Min-Seok rearranged itself permanently. And the first time she babbled something that sounded almost like, "duh," while staring directly at him, his entire household stopped what they were doing just to watch him kneel down at her level, eyes wide, waiting for her to do it again. For the first time in years, the Kang household didn't feel like the center of an empire built on fear. It felt like a home. But peace never lasted long in Min-Seok's world. 3 weeks after the hospital call, while Amara remained in a coma, Min-Seok received a call from the property manager overseeing her old apartment. "Mr. Kang, there's been a break-in." He arrived within the hour. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing valuable had been taken, no jewelry, no electronics, nothing easily resold. Only one thing was missing. A locked metal box that had been bolted beneath the floorboards of her closet, hidden in a way that suggested she had expected someone might come looking eventually. Min-Seok stood in the empty closet, staring at the torn-up floor panel, and a cold realization settled into his chest. Someone had been searching for this box specifically. Someone who knew exactly where to look. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, this is the perfect moment to subscribe, because what Min-Seok discovers next will completely change who you think the real villain is. Comment below who you suspect right now, because I promise you, you're going to be wrong. The investigation that followed consumed Min-Seok entirely. He pulled phone records, financial statements, surveillance logs from the months before the divorce. He discovered that Amara had been followed for nearly 4 months before their separation, quiet, careful surveillance, the kind only someone with serious resources could maintain without ever being noticed. Someone had wanted her watched. Someone had wanted her frightened. And whoever it was had access to information that should have only existed within Min-Seok's innermost circle. He confronted Chairman Choi directly, expecting a war he had spent years preparing for. Instead, Choi simply gestured toward an empty chair and said something Min-Seok never expected to hear from the mouth of his oldest enemy. "Sit down, Kang. Your wife saved your life." The room went silent. "Explain that," Min-Seok said, his voice low and dangerous. Choi studied him for a long moment before continuing. 11 months ago, your wife came to me. Not to betray you. To warn me that someone inside your organization was planning your assassination, and that if I cooperated, she had proof. Real proof. Names, dates, transferred funds. Why would she trust you of all people? Because she had no one else who could move against the threat without alerting your own people first, Choi said. She suspected the traitor had eyes inside your security division. She needed an outside force capable of acting without your knowledge. Min-Seok's hands curled into fists. And the folder she gave you? Financial records. Wire transfers between someone close to you and a private contractor known for arranging accidents. Car accidents, specifically. Choi's eyes flicked toward him meaningfully. The same kind of accident that nearly killed her 3 weeks ago. The room tilted slightly beneath Min-Seok's feet. She didn't betray you, Choi continued. She protected you. And she protected your daughter, who she already knew she was carrying when she came to me, by refusing to ever say your child's name out loud in case someone was listening. Min-Seok sat in silence, the full weight of his own mistake finally crashing down on him. Why didn't she just tell me? Because telling you meant the traitor would know she discovered him. And the moment he knew that, Choi said quietly, he would have killed her before she ever reached the hospital doors. Divorcing you was the only thing that gave her the freedom to disappear and investigate without suspicion. It wasn't betrayal, Kang. Choi leaned forward. It was the most loyal thing anyone has ever done for you. Min-Seok drove back to the hospital that night without speaking a single word to anyone in the car. Amara woke up 4 days later. A nurse called him at 2 in the morning. He arrived within 15 minutes, Zara asleep against his shoulder, and walked into the recovery room just as Amara's eyes fluttered fully open for the first time in over a month. Her gaze found Zara first. Then him. Silence stretched between them, thick with 8 months of unanswered questions. Why didn't you tell me about my daughter? Min-Seok finally asked, his voice raw in a way none of his men had ever heard before. Amara's eyes filled with tears. Because if they knew about her, they would have killed her, Min-Seok. The moment anyone confirmed I was pregnant with your child, she became a target before she was even born. You should have told me what you discovered. About the traitor. I tried to protect you the only way I knew how. I thought if I disappeared completely, if the divorce looked real enough, whoever was planning to hurt you would believe the threat had passed. I thought I was buying you time. You let me believe you betrayed me for 8 months. I let you hate me, Amara whispered, because hating me was safer than you knowing the truth and trying to fix it yourself before I had enough proof. I couldn't risk you confronting the wrong person too soon. Min-Seok sat down beside her bed, Zara still sleeping peacefully against his chest, and reached for Amara's hand. I should have trusted you, he said quietly. Instead, I assumed the worst, and I let you carry this alone. You didn't know. I didn't try to know. That's the part one can't forgive myself for. Amara's fingers tightened weakly around his. Then help me finish what I started. Help me find out who really did this, before they try again. Back at the penthouse, Min-Seok gathered his closest circle and launched a quiet, internal investigation no one outside the room could know about. Suspects narrowed quickly. The family lawyer, who had handled the divorce with unusual speed. The accountant, who oversaw the financial transactions Choi had flagged. A senior lieutenant with growing resentment over recent promotions he felt he deserved. And, though it pained him to even consider it, Do-won himself, the only person who had access to nearly everything Min-Seok did. For days, suspicion shifted from one name to another, each piece of evidence pointing somewhere different, each conversation leaving more questions than answers. Min-Seok trusted no one completely. Except, increasingly, the one person he had once accused of the very betrayal someone else had committed. Late one evening, while reviewing financial documents alone in his study, Jae-hyun appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of tea in his hands, the same easy smile he always wore. "You've barely slept in days," Jae-hyun said, setting 1 cup beside his brother. "Let me help. Whatever this investigation needs, I'm here." "I appreciate that," Min-Seok said, rubbing his temples. "I just can't figure out who had access to both the surveillance logs and Amara's medical records. It has to be someone deep inside."
Jae-hyun's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "We'll find them. Family looks out for family, right?" Min-Seok nodded, exhausted, missing the way his brother's hand tightened slightly around his teacup. Missing the small, careful glance Jae-hyun gave the open file folder on the desk before quietly excusing himself from the room. The truth, when it finally arrived, came from the most unexpected source imaginable. Zara. While playing on the nursery floor one afternoon, she had grabbed Min-Seok's phone, as she often did, babbling nonsense into the camera app the way babies do. It wasn't until that evening, while reviewing the footage for something else entirely, that Min-Seok noticed what was happening in the background of one accidentally recorded clip. Jae-hyun, standing near the study door, speaking quietly into his own phone, believing no one was nearby. Min-Seok turned up the volume. "The transfer needs to go through before the boss notices the discrepancy. Once Amara's fully out of the picture, there won't be anyone left who suspects me." Min-Seok's blood went cold. He played it again. And again. Making absolutely certain he hadn't misheard. He hadn't. His own brother. The room spun slightly as 8 months of grief, suspicion, and quiet rebuilding collapsed into a single devastating realization. Jae-hyun. The boy he had raised after their father's death. The boy he had trained, protected, and given everything to. The same person who had handed him selectively edited footage all those months ago, footage that conveniently showed only enough to destroy his marriage without ever revealing the truth behind it. Min-Seok sat in stunned silence, staring at his daughter's innocent recording, finally understanding that the most dangerous threat to his family had been living inside his own home this entire time. If you're as shocked as Min-Seok is right now, comment the moment you realized something felt off about Jae-hyun, because the next few minutes are about to get even more intense. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because this story is about to reach its most dangerous point. Min-Seok confronted Do-won immediately, sliding his phone across the desk with shaking hands. Do-won watched the recording twice, his expression darkening with every second. "He's been positioning himself for years," Do-won said finally. "Quietly building loyalty among the younger members. I always assumed it was ambition. I never imagined. He orchestrated everything," Min-Seok said. "The footage that ended my marriage. The surveillance on Amara. The accident that put her in a coma. All of it. Why would he target the baby specifically?" Min-Seok's jaw tightened. "Because as long as Zara exists, she's a threat to whatever plan he has for taking over after me. An heir means the organization doesn't pass to him, no matter what happens to me." The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Jae-hyun had spent years living in his older brother's shadow, watching him build an empire while being treated, in his own mind, as nothing more than a useful subordinate. He had convinced himself that Min-Seok's marriage made him weak, that love had clouded his judgment, that the only way to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his was to eliminate every obstacle standing in his path. Amara had discovered the plan months ago. And from that moment, she had become his primary target. "We move tonight," Min-Seok said, standing abruptly. "Before he realizes we know." But by the time they reached the estate's east wing, where Jae-hyun's private quarters were located, the room was already empty. And so was the nursery. Min-Seok's entire world narrowed into a single point of pure, blinding terror. Zara was gone. The call came 20 minutes later, Jae-hyun's voice calm and almost amused on the other end of the line. "I assume you figured everything out by now," he said. "Took you long enough. Where is she?" Min-Seok's voice had dropped into something barely recognizable as human, every word carved from ice and rage. "Safe. For now. Whether she stays that way depends entirely on what you do in the next hour. If you hurt her." "I don't want to hurt her, Min-Seok. I want what should have been mine from the beginning. Step down. Publicly. Hand control of everything to me, no resistance, no contingency plans waiting to destroy me later. Do that, and your daughter comes home unharmed. And if I refuse?" Jae-hyun's voice turned colder than Min-Seok had ever heard it. "Then I finish what I should have finished months ago." The line went dead. Min-Seok stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds before Do-won grabbed his shoulder. "We have his last known location from the tracking chip in the company vehicles," Do-won said. "An abandoned shipping yard near the harbor. If we move now, we still have time." Min-Seok didn't respond with words. He simply turned and walked toward the door with a look that promised absolute devastation for anyone who stood between him and his daughter. The shipping yard stretched out beneath broken floodlights, rusted containers stacked in crooked rows like the remnants of a city no one remembered building. Min-Seok moved through the darkness alone, having ordered Do-won and the others to circle from the opposite side, refusing to risk Zara's safety with anything resembling a loud, chaotic assault. He found them near the central loading dock. Jae-hyun stood beside a single hanging light, Zara cradled against his chest with one arm, the other hand resting casually near a gun tucked into his waistband. "You came alone," Jae-hyun said, almost impressed. "Bold, even for you. Give her to me. You really think this ends with me just handing her over?" "I think," Min-Seok said, taking a slow step forward, "that you've spent your entire life believing you deserve more than what you were given. And I think somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that hurting a baby would actually fix that. You chose her," Jae-hyun snapped, his composure finally cracking. "You chose Amara, and you chose this child, over your own blood. Over me. She is my family too, Jae-hyun. I gave you everything. You gave me scraps. Loyalty without power. Respect without authority. I watched you build an empire and hand me nothing but errands." Zara, sensing the tension, began to whimper softly against Jae-hyun's shoulder. Min-Seok's eyes locked onto his daughter's face, and something inside him went terrifyingly still. "Put her down," he said quietly. "And we settle this between us. Just us. The way it should have always been." Jae-hyun hesitated. For one impossibly tense moment, neither man moved. This is it, the moment everything has been building toward. If your heart is racing right now, smash that like button, because what happens in these next few seconds will determine whether this family ever gets the ending they deserve. Then, slowly, Jae-hyun crouched and set Zara down inside an empty crate beside him, far enough from the confrontation to keep her safe, close enough to remain his last bargaining chip. "Last chance," Jae-hyun said, straightening, his hand finally closing around the gun at his waist. "Walk away from everything. Or I make sure neither of you survives tonight." Min-Seok didn't flinch. "You were never going to let either of us live," he said. Not really. You just wanted to feel powerful enough to pretend you had a choice. Jae-hyun raised the gun. Do-won's voice cut through the darkness from somewhere above the loading dock. Drop it, Jae-hyun. You're surrounded. Jae-hyun's composure shattered completely. In the half-second of distraction, Min-Seok closed the distance between them, knocking the weapon from his brother's hand before he could fire, both men crashing to the concrete in a desperate struggle that years of buried resentment had been building toward. It ended quickly. Min-Seok pinned him against the ground, fist raised, every instinct screaming to finish this the way the world he came from demanded. But Zara's soft crying from the crate beside them stopped his hand mid-air. He looked at his daughter. Then at the brother beneath him, beaten and finally, completely exposed. You chose her over your own family, Jae-hyun spat, blood at the corner of his mouth. She is my family, Min-Seok said, lowering his fist slowly. And I refuse to become the kind of man who teaches her that violence is the answer to everything that hurts us. He stood, lifted Zara gently from the crate, and turned to Do-won. Call the authorities. Everything Jae-hyun built outside this family, every illegal operation, every shadow network, hand it all over. Let him face this the right way. You're not going to handle this yourself? Do-won asked, surprised. Min-Seok looked down at his daughter, finally calm against his chest, her small hand gripping his shirt. I've spent my entire life solving problems with fear, he said quietly. I don't want that to be the only thing she ever sees in me. 3 months passed. Jae-hyun's network had been completely dismantled, his criminal operations exposed and dismantled through legal channels Min-Seok had quietly orchestrated behind the scenes, ensuring his brother faced consequences without dragging the rest of the family into public ruin. Min-Seok had stepped back from active operations almost entirely, delegating most responsibilities to Do-won, choosing instead to spend his days exactly where he had once never imagined himself belonging. At home. With his family. Amara had recovered fully, the physical wounds healing far faster than the emotional ones, though those, too, were finally beginning to mend with every quiet evening they spent rebuilding what fear and misunderstanding had nearly destroyed. One evening, as golden light spilled across the living room floor, Zara stood unsteadily near the couch, holding onto the cushion with both hands, testing her balance the way she had been doing for days. She's getting stronger every day, Amara said, watching with quiet wonder. Min-Seok knelt a few feet away, arms open, the way he had every evening for the past 2 weeks, patient and hopeful despite dozens of failed attempts. Come here, Zara, he said softly. You can do it. Zara released the cushion. Wobbled. Took 1 step. Then another. And then, without any hesitation at all, she walked straight past everyone in the room, straight toward her father, her small arms reaching out the entire way. Daddy! Min-Seok froze. The room went completely silent. Amara's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Min-Seok caught his daughter just as her legs gave out beneath her, lifting her into his arms, and for the first time in longer than anyone in that house could remember, the feared, unshakable Kang Min-Seok dropped to his knees and cried. Openly. Completely. Without any attempt to hide it. Say it again, he whispered, his voice breaking entirely. Please, say it again. Zara giggled, pressing her small hand against his wet cheek. Daddy. Amara knelt beside them both, wrapping her arms around her family, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began, the 3 of them simply held each other in silence, letting the weight of everything they had survived finally settle into something resembling peace. Later that night, while putting away old boxes from Amara's apartment that had finally been returned by the authorities, Min-Seok found something he hadn't expected. A single recorded video, dated almost a year earlier, hidden among Amara's old maternity files. He pressed play. Amara's face filled the screen, younger, lighter, her hand resting gently against her pregnant belly. If you're watching this, she said softly, it means our daughter finally met you. I don't know what happened between us by the time you see this, but I need you to know something important. Please love her enough for both of us, if anything ever happens to me." The video ended. Min-Seok sat in silence for a long moment, then walked quietly into the bedroom where Amara and Zara had already fallen asleep together, his daughter curled peacefully against her mother's chest. He stood in the doorway, watching them both breathe in perfect, undisturbed rhythm, and finally allowed himself to say the words he had needed to say for almost a year. "I almost lost everything," he whispered, "because I chose suspicion over trust. Never again." He turned off the hallway light, crossed the room quietly, and lay down beside the two people who had taught him, against every instinct his old life had ever given him, what it truly meant to be a father. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved me writing it, let me know in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Subscribe if you want more emotional stories like this one, share it with someone who needs a reminder that trust is worth fighting for, and I'll see you in the next story.